Okay. Welcome to the February 1st, 2022, 6 p.m. council meeting. If you would all join me in pledge allegiance. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Justin, the mayor pro tem, is taking notes tonight, so bear with us. Justin, can you do a roll call, please?
Osborne.
Here.
Smock. Here, I think. Nichols. Here. Bean. Here. And Siebel. Here.
Okay, next on our agenda is approval of the February 1st, 2022 agenda. I'll take a motion on that.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Next on our list is approval of January 18th, 2022 regular meeting minutes.
I make a motion to approve the January 18th regular meeting.
I'll make a motion to approve the regular meeting minutes.
Can you take that as a second, Charles?
Yes.
And that'll be a roll call.
Roll call. Osborne.
Yes.
Smock. Yes. Nichols.
Yes.
Bean.
Yes.
Siebel.
Yes.
Number 6 is a presentation from Rose Schroeder. She's with Bolton and Mink regarding our Eagles Landing design standards. And we have her via the phone as well. Okay, Rose, you're on.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for letting me join here last minute via phone. I think you have in front of you both some draft standards to talk about, and then I've got some kind of illustrations you can talk through as well. So I wonder
I can't understand anything she said.
the best way you want to handle this, if you'd like me to walk through the draft.
Yes, if you could, but is there any way that you could speak louder?
Can you hear me better now?
Yes, definitely.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so just looking through the document, I'll just start, I break it up into kind of general sections. The first being access management, mostly just talking about how and where curb cuts might be allowed throughout the project. We talked a little bit about this when I met with you all the first time, but having a conversation about trying to encourage curb cuts where it's possible and to make sure ultimately just that we don't have big, wide, large, constant curb cuts all up and down the nice new street. So looking at, additional allowances if it happens to be on something that is up each a corner. So I guess I'll stop and say, was there anything of note on this particular section anybody wanted to discuss or ask?
I don't believe so, Rose.
Okay.
I think that was pretty,
Right on this?
yes.
Okay, pedestrian facilities, this is also something that I mentioned last time, making sure that the actual individual sites, so the individual lots that people will build on, that there is a way for pedestrians to get around within this development, so making sure there's some kind of identified connection between the public sidewalk and essentially the entry into the building. Now, this can be as simple as a pavement marking, a half pavement marking indicating it's a pedestrian way. So, again, just trying to make sure that there's an accessible route. Sometimes people like to do it with pavers or something, but it also can simply be done with painted markings, just like when they're striping a parking lot. Any thoughts on this section?
Not at this time.
Parking, also, really just saying that the number of parking spaces should comply with your existing code, but that we do want to see those parking lot areas set back at least 5 feet from those property lines and have at least some kind of turf grass or other landscaping vegetation in it. Basically, this just means the way this is written, it's written to say that, we don't want that 5 feet setback to just be full of only river rock. And obviously, if people are sharing parking lots or they adjoin, that could be waived so that there would be better circulation overall in that parking lot. Moving on to planting, basically saying that along the development street, that we would want to see a 10-foot deep, if you will, landscaping strip from the property line. And again, that's intended to be turf grass or have the shrubs that are talked about below. So putting, at least one shrub, and then there's a calculation in there. It can be erased however they want. It's just a way of quantifying, that there needs to be shrubs in there. It's not meant to line them up in a row or anything like that. And it's been consistent. So as each lot develops, there is some landscaping in the front. And then saying the next bullet where it says at least 10% of the gross site. Again, a simple calculation, it's not subjective. Those landscaping strips that I just talked about are included in that. With my experience using a 10% number like that, almost always that is significantly consumed by that landscape parking strip. So it really does not add a lot on top of that. There could be exceptions to that. And again, just saying that in these areas that are required to be landscaped, that they do need to have ground cover or shrubs or something in them and not just this big mulch, unpaved mulch or rock bed. And then talking about in parking lots that have a certain number of parking spaces, making sure there are some shade trees planted in there over time. And then I'll just move on to screening, stating that those, the dumpsters, the trash, exterior storage needs to be screened. This is pretty typical anyway. There's often some kind of fence or masonry wall around them with a gate. Also keep things from blowing around. Signs, I know this is a section, honestly, that always gets a lot of discussion. I know we talked about this a little bit the first time. The way I currently have this drafted for discussion, it basically says that there would be one detached sign on each property. So that could be, the way this is written, that would be a ground or monument sign. So the way this is written, it would not allow individual pole signs. Off-premise signs not permitted, meaning you couldn't have a sign advertising for that's not located on that property. Directional signs, which are often things like for drive-throughs and you exit there. These are things that are vary widely from location to location. Some cities accept them all together, some count them in the overall signage that you already allow. So I left that as a bit of a question mark. The discontinued non-conforming signs is kind of just a standard that's also probably addressed elsewhere. So I assume there's going to be discussion about signs, but do you want me to continue through the rest and come back to it, or do you do that now?
I would really like to discuss the sign since we're at this part. Brian and I talked about it. Brian, I don't know if you want to address it and come up and talk about it, or just something that you've seen, or, there's been a lot of talk. There is some cities that do not allow them to have a sign, like Burger King has a sign, McDonald's, Arby's, et cetera, Flying J, even though you can't see them because it's covered by trees. I think it would be in our best interest to have that type of sign allowed.
The full size.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think so too. I think, it's not kinda like that area is gonna be, totally infested with them signs. I guess, just depends on what,
I'm
kind
sorry,
of business.
Dan, I can't hear very well.
okay. He was just, yeah. Yeah,
I
he's
think that,
talking, yeah.
just depends on what kind of a business you got in there. I know, like, the fast food places, they're always the ones that want to demand if they got the full signs. And I think it's a good idea, when you're driving down the interstate, when you want to get off, you're looking for signs. So I think that that's a big asset to have, I think, in that area.
Yeah.
If you want people to notice your place there.
Any feedback from council on this particular section of the design standards?
So if we do allow obviously ground monuments are in here, if we do allow the big pole or elevated style signs, is there a design standard or is there a way to publish that it
Like
that doesn't get out of control?
conformity,
Yeah, so that it doesn't get out of control and you've got everything looking differently and it just ends up kind of becoming hodgepodge.
What's your thoughts on that, Rose?
So, I mean, we could certainly, set, obviously, a maximum size of it, so they can't exceed that size. We could set the maximum height, which those would be very typical, even just typical zoning requirements on a pole sign. In terms of the design part, it gets a little trickier on a pole sign because by the nature of the pole sign, you're not enclosing the support structure. So you could certainly say what material, the design structure could be. But for the most part, you would really, there's not a lot of design, because I assume you don't want to have some kind of special process for approving the design style itself of the sign. You can't regulate the content of it. So it would really come down to the maximum height, the overall area of the sign, and then, how many they can have on one lot would essentially be, in the case of a pole sign, you could also, to some degree, say the placement, meaning if these are intended to be focused towards the interstate, you could require that they be placed sort of in that location as opposed to the internal development street. But that's, if you're going to allow individual pole signs, that's kind of what you'll be left with.
Advantages, disadvantages. I know it was mentioned a couple weeks ago when we were initially talking about this, doing I forget the name of it, but a sign that is multi-purpose. So it's basically one sign, but everyone is allowed to advertise, in a square. And I know one of the concerns was it can get all kind of cut up after a while as the sizing changes and you have people, businesses come and go. But is that really just the biggest disadvantage, Rose, that you've seen in the past, or?
Yes, and that is a common trend. So in a newer development or, even a shopping center, there is often a trend to do one large kind of more center sign or even depending on the placement, a couple of them, but then yes, individual tenants have the ability to have their, signage on that sign. Over time they do, tenants change as things get refaced. So there is that part of it. A lot of times, the cities that are a little stricter on pole signs in general, it's probably not as much about being, like interested oriented as it is on other internal corridors. There are many places that only allow monument signs now in that scenario, the thing is that at some point, because if I have a lot to put a pole sign on it, and then the next person does, and the next person does, you can have setbacks for those signs, but you don't also want to sort of end up with a whole lineup of them, and then suddenly they're kind of blocking the other's visibility. Now, these lots, are fairly wide, and if you were sort of regulating them to be placed on the lot such that they were visible, if the point was for them to be visible from the interstate, that's probably less of an issue. If you consider allowing them kind of on the more interior of the development, I would want you to consider very much how far setback they needed to be. It's just, when you're talking about curb cuts and all those things like, street signs, light poles, you all of a sudden start to get a whole lot of structures in the front, which can often be visibility issue as well. So regardless of the sign type, the setback of the sign, especially on an interior street, will be very important. It really is preference. Some communities just absolutely don't want to see pole signs, especially in new development. Some take no with it.
So we can get this, work on this to, maybe make some, Brian can make some recommendations as far as what the maximum height would be. I mean, because we have code, obviously, for all this. And,
Yeah,
Yeah, and it doesn't need to change. If the maximum heights that are already set for there are acceptable to you, if the maximum size is acceptable to you, then, that's fine. Then we don't need to separately address it here.
I think we can come up with something.
okay, sounds good. Thanks, Brian. Okay, you can continue on with the architecture.
Okay, great. So then the next couple sections we'll get into the actual building itself. So the first section is really just focusing on materials. Saying that, the structure should be things like brick, some other kind of masonry, stucco, exteriors with stones that could be precast concrete. Basically it's trying to eliminate the really flat, long expanses of walls like smooth space, CMU. Although it doesn't make a provision to allow for some of that if there's some kind of pattern or size variation. It can also, it starts as a second list. They can also have wood or fiber cement boards or even corrugated metal, if at least a certain percentage, I've got 75% of that street facing facade has that other kind of masonry. So it's basically saying these are the preferred, these are the required materials, but if you do at least 75% of those, then you can have some of these other materials in there. I find this list of materials is very common. This one's even probably a bit more liberal. Some just straight out call out, brick and masonry. So this is fairly common what you would find in many places. The next section really is just talking about screening rooftop mechanicals. So that is often achieved with a simple parapet wall. I have also seen situations where if that doesn't quite work right, or like a franchise or a typical building or something, that some mesh screen panels can also be used, kind of in a decorative way to screen those. Also, that way it doesn't require sort of structure changes to a typical building that a franchise might have. And obviously awnings and things should project over property lines, no kind of above roof things. So that's also pretty common everywhere. The one that is sometimes debated, I put it in here really, just for, discussion, although I did not take out the second, sentence about multifamily. But a lot of times in commercial or mixed use where we're looking at design standards, some communities take real issue to having any kind of fixed or fixed roof. I don't know if that's an issue here. It is in some places. This one that I had it was a carryover for something in I was doing, but it is typically also applied to commercial. So I don't know. We can finish this and then talk about if that is an issue at all. The next one, number 5, is what I would call a glazing requirement. And it's saying that the front facade of the storefront of the building would be at least, of the first level, in case there's more than one, would be at least 50% glass or windows, doors or windows. That, we can look at some examples that we were looking at, kind of the sample photos or sheets that we had, that we all provided at the first time we talked. I would venture a guess that those probably all would comply with this. It hasn't ever seemed to be a challenge to get that 50% if someone's doing it through kind of commercial storefront. The next one, number 6, is saying that, if this is a type of business that maybe would have some kind of ancillary, secondary buildings for storage or something, just saying essentially that it could look very similar to that primary building. So the thought being that if these standards, whatever is ultimately adopted, is important for the overall development, then you should take away from that by simply allowing, a wooden garden shed to sit in the back. So that's kind of what that one is sitting at. Excuse me. Also, the placement that it would in no case ever be in front of that primary building. And then in the case that, there would be decorative walls or retaining walls, that are visible, that they would be smooth, safe concrete unless they were treated with some other kind of material. So I will stop there. This section, is also an important one. It really does kind of set the character for the building, especially with materials. Again, I chose kind of a more liberal, all-encompassing than you find in many places. But again, as I said at that first meeting, it's really about what's right for Evansdale. So any thoughts on this structure? With roof shades, building material, anything like that?
Not at this time, but thank you, Rose.
Okay, thank you. I put a section in here for outdoor dining. I'll be perfectly honest, I did not verify in your current code if this is addressed anywhere else. But basically, in the context of these design standards, all it's saying is that they should be on the individual property, not in the right of way, and that they should be contiguous to the front, or excuse me, to the primary building. So essentially not a freestanding kind of rear garden or something like that. If they are providing some kind of side structure or something like that, just making sure it's durable materials that aren't going to fall apart, in the first season. And again, that they are not encroaching on required off-street parking spaces. Now that doesn't mean that they can't consume part of what would have otherwise been maybe a parking area. It's just saying that in a normal, permanent circumstance, any kind of outdoor dining area, patio, whatever you want to call it, shouldn't consume required parking spaces. And again, any kind of walls or fencing that they want to use around that kind of an area should fit with the rest of their site materials or be complementary in some way. Also, rarely have an issue with this. Lighting, really just, this is where if you have a particular preference for parking lot lighting, we're going to require a specific pole to be used throughout, this is where we would say where that is. In many cases, it is typically a community that, is trying to essentially prevent wood poles from being used for parking lot lighting. And then the next, issue is just a pretty standard zoning requirement actually, and you may already have it as well, that, it should project, the light cutoff should project it to the right of way. In this case, you don't have any non-commercial uses around you, so that's, again, those are very, very standard. And those are the main categories I have in here. If there's some discussion on these, that's great. Otherwise, I do have a few just sample photos, honestly, right off Google Maps. These are not both in this project, to kind of give an idea for what some of these things would do or not do.
Any feedback, council, on the design standards?
I think it's a great start. It gives us somewhere to go, and, yeah.
Well, at least we got a start, so.
Thank you, Rose, we really appreciate your time tonight.
Okay, if there,
I'll be in touch with you.
So we can be in touch with you later to see what you might want further modified.
Okay,
Okay, thanks guys, appreciate it, have a good night.
thank you, Rose. If you do have any comments, council, on that, or have any ideas, be free to email me, or I can reach out to you individually. Number 7 on our agenda tonight is appointment for the Waterworks Utility Board Trustee. In full disclosure, he is my nephew. However, I have no oversight whatsoever with the water board. Austin brings with us, he does work for the Waterworks. He has his 1 and 2, or you've been approved for your 2, distribution and plant operation, and could be approved for his 3 because of his background in chemistry. He actually has a degree in chemistry. I think he's more than qualified. Our city attorney said if he was a qualified applicant, that it wasn't an issue, that he is my nephew. But the reason I thought of him is because of his experience, and he's pretty mechanically inclined. You'd probably see that if you went to Independence Raceway, put a plug in.
Somebody said he couldn't attend the meetings when they were scheduled now, is that?
I've already talked to Waterworks about that, and that is correct. So they are willing to change the meetings to after 4:30, and they'll designate that day.
I guess he's better anyway than the way it is.
Well, I think the council had, and even residents had stated that they would like to see the meetings be later so they can attend. So I'll entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to appoint Austin Russell to the Waterworks Utility Board Trustee with a term expiring on December 31st of 2027.
Second.
Can I speak to this?
Sure.
So, nothing against Austin, I don't know him, but not appointing Dottie Weir is not valid. That was the most unfair thing. She's a hard worker, great volunteer. She'd been appointed just 2 years ago to replace Sharon Loftus. And the only reason that she was turned down, from what I've been told, is spite.
I disagree. I told you in an email that it was not from spite.
No, but it was because of a letter that the water board sent out over this public ballot measure. And the water board sent that letter out to explain the measure. So some of the council and some of the citizens apparently were resentful of that. So they're punishing Dottie, a great volunteers, for that letter. That is the most unjust, unfair thing that I've seen. I can't believe it.
Thank you, Dick. I'm just gonna finish the motion and.
Yeah.
All in favor, please?
Aye.
Opposed?
Kelly Parker, Marion Avenue. I think it's a big accusation to assume what motives are for any decisions that our city council makes. I think significant proof needs to be put forward before we decide what the motives are.
Welcome aboard, Austin.
Thank you.
Appreciate you stepping up. Approval of the resolution calendar. All items listed on the resolution calendar will be enacted by one vote. There will be no separate discussion of these items unless a request is made prior to the time council votes on the motion.
I just had one question.
Okay.
Unless you want the motion first. Just to update me why we were increasing the garbage and sewer deposits, why we're,
Well, we have went for several years without updating them. So when someone comes in and they put down a deposit, we want, if they move out in a year or 2 or 2 months or whatever, we want to have enough to cover all of our costs for a quarter of service. So, and just due to all of our increases, that was recommended to us.
with that conversation, I'll make a motion to approve the resolution calendar if there's no other discussion.
I'll second that.
And that'll be a roll call vote?
Roll call, Osborne,
Yes.
Smock, yes. Nichols,
Yes.
Beam,
Yes.
Siegel.
Yes.
Next, number 9 is request from police chief to take bids for the sale of 2011 Dodge Charger. We finally have the 2021 up and running, and we're ready to sell the 2011.
What do you mean by up and running? When to start?
Well, we had purchased actually back in July, and due to shortage of, okay.
I don't know, as long as it was sitting around, Rob, that might have been semi-valid. It took a long time waiting for all the subcontractors to get her up and running, so glad to see it.
That was friendly. I'll take a motion, please.
I have one question.
Yeah.
How's the advertising gonna go where? Are we gonna go a lot of outlets, or are we going on the Evansdale webpage, what are we doing, Chief Dean?
I guess I would propose that we do whatever we typically do, and I imagine that's city Facebook, city website. I guess I'm not sure what other avenues are typically used, but whatever avenues that are typically used and hopefully don't cost any money or relatively little.
We had found on our last adventure that it worked best to put it out for bid. And we did advertise on Facebook, and we did advertise on our website. We advertised here at the library as well. That seemed to be the most productive because we put it on eBay, we didn't get any bids, and that went on for months and months, if you remember right. I would also like for the council to set a starting price of that bid.
I know there's been a lot of discussion, but I'm gonna throw 2,500 out there. I know some people are gonna say it's junk. I don't believe it's junk by no means by the money we spent on the car. But I don't think we should go less than 2,500 and start bid at 2,500, and we can relook at it if we don't get any comments or offers.
How long would you like to keep the 2,500 bid open for, Steve?
I think it should be at least a 30-day window.
30 days? Okay.
and then come back to council if it hasn't happened and decide what we wanna do at that point.
And I actually did a cost analysis for Chief Dean, went back to, clear back to 2009. That's as furthest back our software goes. Can I get a motion to put the vehicle up for sale, to take bids for it, and to start the bids at $2,500 with a window of 30 days?
I'll make that motion.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. 10 is request from police chief to retain one vehicle for emergency use only. And at this time, I invite Chief Dean to come up to the podium.
So I want to thank the council for giving me an opportunity to speak a little on this. There's a vote. I got a little handout for you that I'm going to address some of this as I go through my speech here a little bit. So I've been a member of the Evansdale Police Department for approximately 22 years. Better?
Yeah.
Okay. I've been a member of the Evansdale Police Department for approximately 22 years, and I would argue that that qualifies me, at least to some degree, to have some knowledge about what the police department needs. There's currently a proposal to reduce the police department's squad car fleet down to 4 vehicles in an effort to save money. In my opinion, I think that this proposal defies logic, and I believe that it will negatively affect public safety. I think if there is in fact any possibility of some savings, I think it's minimal, and I don't believe that the small amount of savings would be worth the detriment that it would have to the community. I think that the public safety would suffer due to that. And I think that it begs the question, where is the savings? Because I have not seen it yet. I've done my own research to some degree, and I plan to talk a little bit about that. I had an opportunity to speak with the sheriff, a member of the sheriff's office, who's a friend of mine. He's second in command over there. And so I was curious to how they handle their cars and whatnot. And he explained to me that they rotate their cars out every 4 years. And a lot of those cars are used as they trade them in when they go to purchase new vehicles. So we're talking about a 4-year-old car, and he told me that they average about $5,000 when they trade that vehicle in. And those typically range anywhere from 110 to 140,000 miles. So I think that bears repeating. A 4-year car, 4-year-old car that gets traded in, and they average about $5,000 on that trade-in, and those vehicles average between 110 and 140,000 miles. He also told me that in an effort to be prepared, they also keep 2 vehicles on the shelf, so to speak. So when they have a patrol car that gets hit by a deer, or what they recently had, 2 vehicles out on the interstate working accidents, they had a semi take out 2 of their vehicles. That's a pretty big loss to any department, but to lose 2 vehicles right off the bat like that. And I will tell you from experience, recent experience, when we purchased our new vehicle, that trying to get that outfitted, and ready for use took approximately a year. So if we are sitting with 4 vehicles, if something happens to our vehicles, whether it be an accident or a deer or whatnot, it could be a year before we get another vehicle to replace that vehicle. Again, I want to go back to public safety. I think that the big issue here is safety to the community. We need to be able to do our job. It's our job to be prepared. We can't afford to be underprepared. If I'm sitting with 4 vehicles and I have an emergent call, and I end up having to rely on that parked vehicle that's been, say, parked for a month, and I have to hope that that car will start. I don't want to be in that situation. I think it's important when we start talking about public safety, to look at our surrounding communities as it relates to safety. Some of our surrounding communities appear to be doing better than others as it relates to the crime in their community. And I think it's important to, for people who are looking to live in those communities or bring businesses to those communities to feel safe. Without public safety, there is no community growth. When you're considering value on a vehicle, you look at a lot more things than just mileage. When you go to buy a car, you don't just look at the mileage on the vehicle.
I'm sorry. I'm working on this. Oh, yeah, shut it off. I'm working on it. Good. I got it. I'm sorry.
Back to
It's
what I
a
was
new
saying.
phone.
When you go to look at, to purchase a vehicle, you don't just consider the mileage on that vehicle. You look at the age of the vehicle, what options are on that vehicle, has it been damaged, the vehicle type, the care and maintenance. Police cars are workhorses. The back seats of our police cars, I would argue, are a biohazard sponge. You can expect to find nearly any bodily fluid you can imagine back there. This isn't this isn't a car you're gonna buy for your family. This isn't grandma's car that's been, what's that?
It ain't mine.
Still there?
Are you still there?
Yeah.
Sorry. So what I'm saying is, this isn't grandma's car that's been sitting in a garage for, say, 20 years, not being used and has low mileage. Historically, our squad cars have sold relatively cheap, and there's a handout in there that I provided you that the mayor had provided me. It talks about an analysis, so to speak, of our vehicles that we've sold over the last roughly 5 years. So it gives you anywhere from $2,800 down to roughly $1,500. Squad cars typically don't bring a lot of money, and I learned that from talking to the sheriff's office as well. I also provided you a sheet that looks like this. And this is a little bit of a breakdown that I came up with. Since we last talked, I dove into this a little more, and I learned how many miles we're driving on a monthly basis. Across our entire fleet, we're driving 4,650 miles across roughly 5 vehicles. So I did some calculation between 4 vehicles and 5 vehicles. And I took that 4,650 miles and divided that by 4 vehicles and 5 vehicles to break it down to a monthly mileage per vehicle. And you can see that for 4 vehicles, you're at 1,162, and for 5 vehicles, you're at 930. So then I took that times a year, 12 months, and I came up with an annual average mileage per vehicle. Again, 4 cars, you're looking at 13,000 miles, 5 cars, you're looking at 11,000 miles. Now, if we have 4 cars and say you purchase that car now, that car will rotate out in 8 years, because we're buying every other year. If we have 5 cars, that car would rotate out in 10 years, again, because we're buying every year. Those vehicles, on average, will be looking at 111,000 miles. The miles stay the same, because the workload stays the same. I also looked at the oil changes. If you do an oil change every 3,000 miles, you can estimate roughly what you're gonna be looking at for oil changes, maintenance. Whether it's 4 cars or 5 cars, 8 years or 10 years, you're looking at roughly 37 oil changes over the life of that vehicle. When it comes to getting,
Can you hear me?
sorry,
It's Charles.
Yeah, can Mike hear me?
I can.
Hi, just got a question for you because we've been kind of looking at this for quite a while.
Okay, can I finish my presentation here first?
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, can I finish my presentation, then I'll be glad to take questions.
Sure.
So when it comes to getting rid of vehicles or getting rid of the expense, I don't have a problem with that as long as it makes sense. I think that when we look at bills for the vehicles, I think it has to do with, a lot has to do with perspective. How do we look at this? I think that when we look at bills, it should tell us whether or not this resource is being used. And I think that is exactly what some of these bills tell us. When we have maintenance bills, that tells us these vehicles are being used. You can go out and look at the odometer on some of our vehicles. Again, you can look at the maintenance bills. It tells us these resources are being used. When the department added an officer, we didn't ask for another car. When the department added Elk Run, which is a population of about 1,069 people as of 2020, we didn't ask for another car. I think it's interesting that we were talking, we had a lady on the phone here a little bit ago talking a little bit about the development of Eagles Landing and marketing, because I want to talk a little bit about that too. I think this has a lot to do with marketing and attracting businesses and residents and the message that we convey. We've added a police officer, we patrol Elk Run, we have Eagles Landing, which we're trying to develop and attract commercial businesses, and we'd like to attract residents. The city is growing. I think the last thing that businesses and residents want to hear is that the city council is reducing public safety resources. If you want to save money, I would point you directly to GPS. The GPS unit that was purchased here not so long ago for all city vehicles was roughly $3,900. $1,600 of that was the police department share. The police department is triple covered right now when it comes to GPS. This is an expense, at least where it relates to the police department, is a wasted expense. We are covered by our camera system, which has GPS, and we're covered by a system called TRAX, which is a statewide program that all law enforcement use, and our dispatch unit, dispatchers have access to that as well. I can see where officers are anywhere in the state when they're logged into this program. I can access that information through dispatch. We are triple covered when it comes to GPS. It's an absolute waste of money as it relates to the police department. That's $1,600 savings right there. Another thing that comes to my mind or attention when we talk about taking resources away from the police department is morale. I handed in the handouts I gave you, there are a couple of advertisements for other areas across Iowa that are advertising for law enforcement. I'm not looking for a pity party. The police department doesn't want your sympathy, but I think it's no big secret to everybody that law enforcement is under a national microscope. And I will tell you that over half of our police department has expressed to me at some point or another recently that they're considering other options. Taking resources away from the police department makes us feel unsupported to some degree. It makes us feel as if we're defunding the police. And I'm not trying to say that you're pulling the plug on the police department or you're trying to pull a rug out from under the police department. I'm not trying to be that dramatic. But you're taking resources away from us and you're making it more difficult for us to do our job and provide the same level of service. We have laws out there that get passed every year that make it more difficult for us to do our job. We feel like our hands are tied. Every couple of years, we have new council members, new mayors. It seems like we always have to justify our existence, defend ourselves. We get asked about our schedule, how many times or how something was handled, or if we need certain equipment and it shouldn't be taken away. We get asked about why our cars are sitting at the police department. Nearly everything we do requires some sort of paper trail. We do reports, we make phone calls, we review evidence, we do interviews, we do follow-up on cases. Anytime there's an arrest or an investigation, it takes a lot of time. A simple OWI can take half a shift. If there's an accident or somebody's injured, it can take a full shift. It can take your entire shift. I've had it happen. We had a home invasion that occurred in Elk Run here about a year ago. And as we investigated that incident, it led us to several suspects that we ended up doing search warrants to catch up with those folks, and we seized their phones from them. We had to do data search warrants on their phones to get the data off their phones, which also led us to social media. I spent a week sitting at my desk reviewing data from phones and social media. I wanted to tear my hair out. Our job requires us to sit at a desk a lot and make phone calls. You might ask, why don't we use our cell phones to make phone calls? Because when we use our phones in the course of our duty, now those phones are subject to search warrant and end up in court. That's why we don't use our cell phones. I want to be clear and transparent. Reducing public safety resources will make it more challenging for the police department to adequately serve our growing community. I'm on record standing against defunding or reducing public safety resources that taxpayers expect and pay for. Prior to this vote on this issue, I think it's fair and reasonable to ask that Councilman Siebel demonstrate to the council and taxpayers with some level of depth and accuracy where this savings is. I urge the council to demonstrate leadership by considering what your constituents want for the safety of this community and the message you want to convey to potential businesses and residents that are considering a move to Evansdale. Allow the police department to retain and use its resources. And while I'm here, I want to just touch on one other issue that has come up, and then I'll step down. The issue of Elk Run and us patrolling Elk Run. Elk Run is approximately 8% of our calls. They are an extremely small extremely small compared to our call value. We spend very little time over there. Our contract obligates us to roughly 25 hours a week. It's very minute when it comes to the whole perspective of our job and what our obligation is over there. They've expressed to me that they're very happy with our service. Currently, they're paying $50,000 for law enforcement services. In my view, that's nearly free money for us. For our efforts over there, that's nearly free $50,000 to the citizens to help with their tax askings. Evansdale has been very aggressive in price increases to the city of Elk Run, in my opinion. And I know that I'm on record saying that I would support a reasonable increase, but that I have since changed my opinion, and I've had an opportunity to talk to the Elk Run mayor. And I see that we have been very aggressive at increasing the cost for them. I'm telling you now that they could pay less elsewhere while still getting service from the Evansdale Police Department. And what I mean by that is, we're still gonna help out. We always have. When they've had calls over there, especially if they're emergent, we're gonna go help out. By increasing the cost of Elk Run to pay for police services, I can almost guarantee you, you will lose them. And that will negatively impact the Evansdale taxpayers, and it will make it difficult for, when it comes to our budgets. I know that the issue between what happened with the library and Elk Run pulling out regarding the library has soured some people to some degree. But I would argue that two wrongs don't make a right, and we should not stoop to that level. I think that we should be a good neighbor and build bridges and not raise their cost. Thank you.
Good job, Mike.
Charles, did you have a question? Charles?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, yep.
Okay, just got a couple of questions for you, Mike. What was the typical raise for the police officers in the RG new contract this year? Wasn't it like 2%?
2.75 is what I'm being told.
Okay, you think, we're going back to Elk Run, is your opinion that Elk Run shouldn't share in our cost increases on a yearly basis?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying at this point in time, I would not entertain an increase. I think that we, over the years since they've come and, we've
Everybody's kind of, taking on these increases.
well,
I mean,
that's
regardless.
That's certainly for you folks to decide. What I'm saying is that I think Evansdale's been very aggressive at their increases since we started providing service to them. And I don't think at this time it's prudent to increase.
Okay, question number 2. Is there anywhere that you can increase your take, the money that the police department brings in that will kind of offset some of this? In other words, my question is would increased patrols increase what you bring in to the department?
Law enforcement has never typically been a money-making entity. We're simply here to enforce laws. It's not our job to make money.
Okay, because I work out of Hudson, I know you're really familiar with Hudson and whatnot. Every time I come into town, I see a patrol car. The other night, they had 2 people stopped. And I'm sitting there going, gosh, why do I always see them, but I don't see ours, and this car is an issue? They use that as, helping them offset some of the cost.
Well, I would argue that the amount of return you see on a citation issued is minute.
But it is a return.
That may be. Of course, when you end up in court on citations.
I mean, we all know we got a speeding problem in town, right? I mean, we talked about that, and I do appreciate right after that, I did see increased patrols for a couple weeks, and then we're right back to not seeing you guys as much again. So what I'm doing is I'm not against, having a car to the side, for emergency type situations at all. What I'm against is that we're not doing anything on the other side to offset some of this price to the citizens. And that's, goes to Elk Run, that goes to the cars, that goes to, the whole bit. I mean, what I like to see is
if you want to
you take on a little bit of the responsibility of, everything's increasing, so how are we going to handle this? I mean, if we don't take Elk Run, why wouldn't we reduce what we have, 8%? If you're saying that it's only taking 8%, why wouldn't we decrease, 8% of the budget on the police department right away if Elk Run left us? I mean, you're saying that you're spending 8%.
If the argument is that you want to try to save money, again, I'll argue that the police department's job isn't to make money, but I would also do my best to keep the $50,000 you're getting from Elk Run.
Did you say 50,000? What's it gonna cost them to hire an officer?
I'm not sure.
And they'll also have a situation where they've got to go to dispatch then and pay that increased cost, which we didn't pass on last year, which was a pretty big increase.
Okay, well, I've given you my opinion. You folks will make the decision you want to make.
So you're not willing to increase patrols that would increase revenues, that would help the situation out some?
We're gonna do our job as we always have. It's not the job of the police department to make money.
I guess, yeah, my opinion on that, Charles, is if we're worried about writing tickets to make money, we might as well start popping up speed cameras, red light cameras, and anything else throughout the town to bring that in. And my opinion of law enforcement is not to be out there looking for ways to make money by citing
No,
our
but from
citizens.
constituents on a pretty good rate, we get told over and over again, I'm not sure about the rest of them, that speeding is an issue. We've had that discussion before.
Yep, I
And
agree
like I
with that,
said, and it did increase, and it did start helping. Why did it increase? Why has it now gone back?
I can sit on Evans and write tickets all day today, and you will have speeders again tomorrow.
Mike, the reason I started looking at this, and the mayor participated in this, is I looked at the expenses on the charges. First of all, I wanna make a comment here, because I can see where you're going here. I'm not against the police department. I'm not against police officers. This money you're getting from Elk Run is not, it's like saying, okay, I don't wanna lose that money. We're not making any money at all on that money we're getting from Elk Run. They have 24-hour service, okay? We are losing money on that contract. Yes, you guys go through there and the things you do, but you keep saying it's not a generated revenue department. You're not out to make money, but on the other hand, you say, well, that 50,000, I don't wanna lose that 50,000 because it's money for the police department. That's great. But the cars should have been 2 years ago gotten rid of both chargers. You and I talked about that in the beginning. You sat right here in the morning meeting and told me, Steve, you're right on that assumption. Now, I'm great that you did a lot of homework, and I'm gonna do homework to come back with your allegations and things you're saying. But I'm not about, I don't think this 5-car, 4-car thing is really as big an issue as you're making. And we had talked about, if we went to this program, that we were gonna monitor this for a year, and we're all human. If it made a mistake, we made a mistake.
I can't afford to
Okay,
make mistakes.
but if the officers are gonna leave because of this car thing,
No, that's not just it.
well, it's part of your presentation.
Sure, it certainly
Okay,
is.
so losing a car, an officer is gonna go somewhere else because they're gonna lose a car in the patrol.
It's not just that.
What is it then?
It's wages, it's, you know.
Okay,
it's
but you can't
insurance.
hold that against this topic.
I understand that. I'm just presenting what I'm seeing.
Now, you just said to me, you spend very little time in Elk Run. Okay, how many, the tickets you write in Elk Run, if you do write any, does that money come to Evansdale or does it go to Elk Run if you actually write a ticket that is paid, speeding, whatever you accrue?
I would argue probably the vast majority of it goes to the state.
That's, doesn't go to Evansdale or Elk Run, a part of it?
I don't have those numbers, maybe a small portion. It's very small.
Elk Run does receive a check every month.
So you write tickets out there and we're patrolling it and they're getting the money on the tickets, so that's great, okay. This is not a thing, I mean, I'm gonna go through and look at this and, my biggest concern, I respect everything you're saying as a police chief. I respect what Charlie's saying about patrolling. What I really struggle with is going by the CRC on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, and a monthly basis. And the majority of the vehicles are always there. Now, I'm not saying,
I don't have 5 officers working at a time.
okay, but, so all the cars are not being used on a continual basis that you're upset about by not having 5 sitting there and having 4 sitting there.
They are being used.
I don't believe it, Mike, because I've been by there enough to see the cars are not all gone. You might have 2 cars on an average gone from the CRC on an average.
They're not all gone at one time, because I don't have 5 officers working at one time.
I understand, I'm saying any time of the day or night that I go by there, all the vehicles, usually unless one person is patrolling, the other 4 are sitting. Now, if you want, I didn't want to take video and camera, I didn't think this was going to get into this kind of ordeal. I was looking at a cost savings to the citizens and the residents, and I didn't think it was affecting the police.
Okay, where's that savings?
I'm gonna,
I mean, we've been talking about this for a while.
we can look at the expenses on the charges that I've been wanting to get rid of them for a year.
Okay,
But we got $40,000-$50,000 in charge of repair
how
bills.
long have we been talking about this?
You and I talked, Dan and I talked about it for quite a while. I talked to you in the Monday
You
morning
haven't
meeting.
had time to show us some savings that you've come up with?
Not at this point, we've just been discussing.
Well, your argument is that there's savings there. I think it's reasonable and fair that you show it to us.
I'll definitely, you're looking at, I think it could be savings by what you just said here on the cars when we turn them around for $2,800 a piece. If we had, and we were talking about rotating vehicles sooner than what your presentation is, 4 and 8 years getting rid of vehicles.
So you're
So
gonna get a new car every year?
we might,
Okay,
I
I might be interested in that.
this is in dialogue or communication and understanding. So my point was, if we end up in the end road and we got 4 vehicles that are fairly new all the time, the repairs are gonna go down. They have to, because I've looked at the repairs on the newer ones and I've looked at the repairs on the Chargers. And I know it's gonna save money.
Some of those repairs are attributable to specific incidents. They're not just maintenance. We have
I'm not,
pursuits.
I don't wanna go into question everything that the Chargers have been billed for and done. To me, I don't wanna get into that right now. But I think the professional sense is if you have a newer fleet, you're gonna have less expenses. And if you wanna call it better protection, newer equipment, that's what you're gonna end up with.
Well, I illustrated to you what the sheriff's office told me. They're rotating their cars out after 4 years and they're trading them in and they're getting $5,000 on a trade-in.
That wasn't necessarily what we had talked about.
With 140,000 miles on it.
Well, they're gonna get that with a police car. I mean, I don't know. You got 40,000, you're saying 4,600 miles a month on the cars. So
That's across 5 cars.
across 5 cars, 4,600 a month. Okay, so isn't that 5,000, 12, isn't that 60,000 a year mileage?
You could do that.
Well, it's your paperwork.
Yep, man.
So 60,000, so now you're telling me if we're averaging 60,000 miles a year of all your vehicles. You're telling me that when you trade them off, you only got 140,000 and they're 8 years and 10 years old. I'm gonna look at that a little bit. I don't know if I understand that math. But this is just to try to save some money, because like everybody's been talking, budgets are always going up, wages are always going up, expenses are always going up. And then you stand here and say you want to be neighborly friendly to help run, and that's fine. But that comes with a cost. I mean, what if it was the other way around? Do you think Elk Run would just let us ride free?
With all due respect, you're the one who represents the constituents.
Right.
I simply am giving my opinion. You're the ones who make the decision. I'm just giving you
But I asked you a question.
professional opinion.
So you're telling me tonight on record that regardless of what expenses have been and going forward, we should not look at the budget at Elk Run at all. We should be neighborly friendly.
I'm telling you, if you do that right now, you will lose $50,000 and they will go back to the sheriff's office.
Well, you know, if that's what really breaks them, that going up on their budget and they wanna lose Evansdale for patrol, I don't think we've made that decision yet. That we don't know the numbers, what the county's coming out with. I mean, we're gonna get the numbers from the county and see what they're proposing to them. So for you to make that statement tonight, I don't know how you can make that be a valid statement.
That's my opinion.
Okay, your opinion.
Yep.
Okay, so we don't have the facts yet. So once we see the facts of what the county's telling you, I might change my thought a little bit, but my goal was always with the mayor to get a newer fleet on a regular basis to less expenses.
You're only gonna base your opinion on whether you're gonna not increase Elk Run based on what the sheriff's office is gonna offer?
No, that's not what I said. That's one criteria. I'm gonna look and see what they are.
Maybe I misunderstood you. That's what it sounded like.
We have to look at expenses, Mike. I've looked at, since I've been on the council, you know how much the budgets have went up in the last 4 years?
I don't.
The fleet, okay. Well, you take a look at that, cause you get it. And, they went up, and there's set things that always go up in cost. And it's a factor of just trying to save some money, still provide the same protection, and have less expenses. I don't know how you think that's wrong.
I'm not saying that I wouldn't agree with you, but I haven't seen any evidence of where there's savings. I'm not saying I wouldn't agree with you.
And as far as the Elk Run thing, I really find it troubling that you tell me because of talking about a project, taking a car with the officers want to leave Evansdale. I find that very immature myself. I'm sorry. I mean, if there's a reason behind the way things are done, and if it was your money, or their money, or my money, I'm sure you might make a little different decision than you're making as a chief, and I respect that.
But you're gonna tell me I'm immature.
No, that's not what I said, Mike. I'm trying to get you to understand there's two sides to this.
You just called me immature,
No, I said, why, I don't want to
Okay,
be
guys.
in.
I'm sorry. Yeah, let's,
Yeah.
okay, thank you.
Thank you, I appreciate that. I appreciate Mr. Sebo giving his presentation. I don't think that anybody was meaning to be called out specifically on this. I think it was just something that you and I had been discussing since November, and that's why it's probably went to this
I don't think,
part. And
I don't think tonight, Mayor, we should have brought up the outrun contract. It's not on the agenda. And if he wanted to bring that up at the proper time when it's on the agenda, fine, but tonight kind of blindsided about that. I don't appreciate that.
See, I don't go to the thing where it's plus money. It'd be like me and my business say, well, this afternoon, we're gonna sell cabinets for $50, it cost me $250, but it's all plus income. I mean, that's about how much sense it makes.
well, we're not discussing that. It was brought up tonight because he just wanted, it was his opinion. He wanted you to see his opinion, and that's the only reason. What is on the agenda is request from police chief to retain one vehicle for emergency use only. That is what's on the agenda. So that, I'll take a motion to table, I'll take a motion to approve.
Can I just say something?
Yes.
So I'll probably request for it to be tabled. I feel like we had some really good discussion regarding this. I like Steve's points, I like Chief Dean's points, and it will give me lots of stuff to think about, so that we can maybe make a proper decision come a couple weeks, the next meeting. But maybe some kind of happy middle, I'm thinking maybe, and I don't even know if this would work or not, but maybe since we're gonna be down to 4 cars, or, this year, I think, and I think maybe you and I talked about that, or someone talked about it, but maybe we could look at trying a trial basis, like 4 this year, or 3 this, or 4 this year, and if it doesn't work out, like do 4 this year, and then I want, like Chief Dean to put down on a piece of paper every time that a 5th car he could have used. And then we could relook at it and then say, okay, yep, you're right, you are so right, let's bring that car back. Because it would show that, yeah, it's a valid point, and yeah, we do need that car, and yeah, let's bring it back. Or maybe, keep the 5 cars and he documents every time he's used it. And then next year we could look at it and say, okay, we only used it 5 times, so we can get rid of it. Maybe do something like that where it's a, like a compromise where we could all make everybody happy, I mean, I know that's probably impossible in today's world, but, maybe that's just one way to be able to prove those numbers and show.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes.
I honestly think that for as little as we get out of the older cars, that we shouldn't put Mike in a bind, at all. I don't think, I have no problem letting the force keep that extra vehicle under the auspice that it's only going to be used in certain circumstances. I think that if we try to use that as a telltale of whether he needs 5 cars or not, I think you're gonna find out that 5th car gets used a heck of a lot. But, I just think that, for as little as we get out of them, if we can keep, I'm sure he's got one in mind, to keep, and keep it, in the sense that they're not gonna use it, so when they're out of the other 4 vehicles. That's my opinion.
My only concern with that, Charles, because I had also considered that as well when this came up on the agenda for emergency use, is if they focus everything on, again, my experience, so I can give you the example with the fire department, we have 2 ambulances currently for the city. When the new ambulance came in, we would drive that first, and then all of a sudden rack up a ton of miles on it, because we don't run 2 calls that often, but we do run it often enough that we need it. We found out that we were putting on all the miles, 80% of our miles on the new unit. It quickly surpassed the mileage of the older one. The older one's still perfectly fine, it just didn't turn a wheel. So we developed a process to flip the units So in the winter, the older of the two is the primary unit to help balance those miles. Where I'm going with that is not only does it help keep the miles a little more distributed, but it also keeps a gas-powered and even diesel-powered vehicle in running condition. My concern with using it as emergency use and it stays parked, the most it'll have happen is it starts up, once a week just to make sure it starts, but that doesn't do good for vehicles wear and tear and just simply letting it run. I think we'll see it age a lot quicker, and I think then our maintenance bills definitely will be a lot higher trying to keep it running, simply just because it's parked.
Right. But you see where I'm getting at, the situation of letting him keep one, in the sense that we're not getting much value out of selling it, to be honest with you.
And I would agree. I would agree selling a squad car does not warrant much buyback.
But we do need to start keeping up a little closer with how much we're looking at. We should be able to break this thing down with the GPS pretty much what's patrolled on a weekly basis and what percentages are patrolled during the weekly basis, and go from there.
I was actually just going to suggest the same thing, Charles, considering that I certainly don't want to make any accusations that if we say, well, prove that it's gonna be kept for emergency use, and then all of a sudden the officers are just gonna drive it daily. But why don't we go back, and if we've got 3 forms of GPS on these vehicles, Chief Dean, is it an acceptable request to state, could we pull miles or anything on past usage of that vehicle to actually show the miles that are being turned on it at a weekly or monthly basis?
Yeah, I think that can be done. I guess we have to decide which vehicle we're talking about.
Sure. But we could show GPS reports that all vehicles are being moved,
Yeah.
On a daily, weekly, monthly basis.
Yep.
And then we'd have to look at how we're rotating cars and actually go to the, second oldest vehicle the next time when we're rolling cars.
Well, I think which vehicle were to be gotten rid of, if that's the direction we were to go, I would want to have a discussion about that as well.
Mm-hmm.
My intent was always the other Charger, not one of the SUVs.
And I realize that too, and I'm on record agreeing with that. However, since our last conversation, I dove into that a little bit, and I learned that that vehicle has 108,000 miles on it, I believe. At 50,000 miles, the motor was rebuilt or a new motor was put in it. So that vehicle, the motor itself only has about 58,000 miles on it. Whereas the Tahoe has 134,000 miles on it and is older.
But that's something that you could rotate out eventually, right? Like the Charger, you could, after you get so many miles on it, you just rotate and buy an SUV or. If the Charger was the issue, I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's what he was stating, was just which car would it be, and that was his argument, I believe, Mike, if I'm misstating you, but.
Yeah, when we look at the mileage on those vehicles and maintenance and whatnot, that's when I learned that there was a new motor or a rebuilt motor put in that Charger. Because originally I would have supported getting rid of it. But then I realized this motor only has 58,000 miles on it. That might not be the one we want to get rid of. I'm not sure.
Yeah, do you still have a warranty on it too?
I doubt that.
So I have a motion, is that right?
I'm gonna say,
Table?
Yeah.
I would like to table it.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Laura, did you want to come up to the podium and state something regarding this topic?
I agree with Mike 100%. And I know that probably shocks a lot of people because I hardly ever believe or agree with the police. But everything he said made total sense to me. That was the way I was raised, to buy and sell cars. You don't keep cars for very long if you can avoid it. Unfortunately, my income at this point has me in a different position where I'm more on the tail end of ownership of cars. I'm usually the end user. But what he is saying financially makes perfect sense. Everything he said. There was absolutely nothing he said that I didn't agree with. And it's really disappointing to me that, I don't know, how many full-time officers do we have, Mike?
Including me, 8.
8. Okay, so how many of them are part-time?
I think we maybe have 4.
So you have 3 full-time officers that are probably on duty on the weekends. Each one of them is gonna set up the car for their own stuff. And that's really what you're trying to take away from them, is a little bit of their homeness of being in a unit, their comfort level, having the seats that are set to their specific setting. You know how annoying it is when my boyfriend gets in my car and my seats are all crazy because he can't even get his knees in. Things like that, when they go to start the car and it resets, have got to be incredibly frustrating for these guys. And when you're talking about Elk Run, and I know I'm not supposed to bring that up, but I feel at this point it's necessary. When you're talking about Elk Run, only taking 8% of their calls, that's like, what else are they doing? Of course they're gonna go and help our neighbor. Our landlines surround them. They are part of us. They come to our stores. A lot of us go to the one store they have in town. You know, we work with our neighbors. We don't want to dismantle that relationship in any way. I think it's ridiculous that we're even considering dismantling that relationship. Yes, it would cost Elk Run a lot more money to have their own police force, but really, we're not that big of a community. We can handle it. Why wouldn't we? They're gonna be there anyway. Every time there's an emergency, especially when we had, that home invasion last year, of course we're gonna be there. Now, if I might be mistaken, but I believe one of the guys that was involved in being part of the victim of that situation is a city employee. Works,
Volunteer firefighter.
yeah, works for us. And a lot of our volunteers live in Evansdale, don't they? Or in Elk Run? Don't we have a few of them? I know that one of my family members lives in Elk Run and is a volunteer firefighter as well. We really need to keep that relationship as pleasant as possible. And in the event that we start looking at having Blackhawk County come in and take over, we're gonna start getting resentment from the sheriff's office too. I just feel like
Thank you,
that's,
Laura.
well, and one more thing, in regards to what Chuck was saying with the quotas, and that's essentially what Chuck is asking for, is quotas. The moment we start putting quotas on the police to bring in money, we start losing the respect of the community.
Thank you. Number 11 on our agenda is for public notification only. 111 Bright Street, we had to reset the public hearing by publishing. We already got the authorization to do that on our first meeting in January. So we will be holding that public hearing as well as hopefully pass a resolution if we receive a bid on it, and that will be February 15th.
Why do we need a public hearing? We don't have, to me, people could,
Sale city property.
it's still city property, but people could put a bid in it now. We said what we wanted for it.
I'm just saying, we have to have a public hearing in order
To sell
to hear the public. We haven't received any bids as of this time. I'm just simply stating it's gonna be on the February 15th now instead.
I figured we wouldn't have to have a public hearing until somebody made a bid on it or.
Well, when you're selling city property, we had no idea if someone was gonna bid on it or not.
Yeah, but to bid on it, they gotta come in and make a proposal and give you the bid, then the
But we
council.
put it out for bid. We put it out for bid
Yeah,
in
you put it out for
January.
bid, but if it don't sell right away, it'll still be a year from now. We
This
still
is-
have a bid.
This is state ruling. I did verify that with our attorney as well.
I don't agree with him, but that's, that.
Yeah. I didn't think we had to republish it either, so. Number 12 is request from mayor to replace firewall at City Hall, Public Works, Waterworks plant and Waterworks office in the amount of $6,056. That would be divided amongst all the different departments, and that was budgeted for FY '22.
I make a motion to approve that request from the mayor.
Second?
Does it get cold in there?
All in favor, please?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you for your sense of humor tonight, Ron.
Come in. Stand up.
Request from mayor to replace 3 vestibule heaters units in the amount of $17.50 with Henninger Electric. We have heaters in each, and it is actually required by code, and they have outlived their life. I think those are the original ones you had installed back in the 70s.
Maybe. Already?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, already. It's almost been 60 years. I think we did pretty good.
60
So,
years, 50 years.
Huh?
50. I was born in the 70s.
Okay.
Don't put 6 decades on me.
Technicality, darling, technicality.
Then I see also we had 2 bids and Henninger was the low.
Yes, and Henninger was the lowest one. I'll take a motion for that, please.
I make a motion to approve that request, and I am happy to see that there were 2 bids on this project at this time.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? FY '23 budget workshop, nothing has really changed. I know we have to make a decision, one way or another, regarding the Elk Run, because that's gonna make a big difference in our budget. If we do, from what I understand, Blackhawk County Sheriff's Department was not willing to give them a quote unless they decided to go with them. And that is something I just found out this week. I hope it doesn't get to that point. I've talked to several of you, and you were pretty set on doing an increase this year, doing an increase the following year, and maybe not an increase the 3rd year. Those are just some different things we've been throwing out. I want you to consider, I'd really love to visit with you. If, you know, for some reason we do not do this agreement with Elk Run, we're either gonna increase our levy from 7.97 and some change to 8.3. And I want you to think about your constituents on this particular topic, and maybe reach out to others, maybe reach out to the constituents in your ward to see what their perspective is. Since we're only doing 8%, our call volume for Elk Run is only 8%. Obviously ours is the other 92%, and that is based over an average of 3 years.
You're what, 4% a year?
We were looking at 3% this year. I talked to Lisa again today. 3% this year, maybe do a 3-year agreement, 3% the following year, and then there would be no increase on the 3rd year.
It's hard to explain to the citizens of Evansdale that another town is getting the same service at 1/3 of the cost, or less than 1/3 of the cost.
But they're not getting the same service. Their call volume is only 8%.
Yeah, but then if their call volume went up, we still gotta take care of it.
Even if it was 24/7 emergencies all day, and there was an explosion over there, it will work
What's our
itself
call
out
volume,
eventually.
then what's our call volume compared to Waterworks?
I don't know. I
See,
can find that
Waterworks
out.
come out here, and when we had a price a few years back in Waterworks, and it's in the millions of dollars, over
Oh,
$1
I
billion.
know. Yeah.
Service Evansdale.
Yeah.
But yet we can do it for another town for 1/3 of the price, or one bit more.
I mean,
I'm not out to rip them off, I want
No.
to see them succeed as well as anybody.
I understand that. Since we've been working with them, and that's FY '17, we have increased their agreement 57%. That's a lot. I'm just letting you know, I'm just giving you the facts. So
What was
I would,
out at $1?
what's that?
What do we start out at, $1?
No, it was actually 31,716.
So that was real low. Okay.
Yeah, we were way low. Should never been that.
And I think it is, what we were looking at that time, or the,
And I would like to say something also, everybody keeps bringing up the relationship with Elk Run and blah, blah. Y'all gotta look at it as well. They've also gotta be willing to keep in this relationship as well. And you're talking a 3% increase and worried about them ditching us. is that at this point, it's my opinion that it's their call of whether they want to keep this relationship or not.
I agree. I do believe they wanna work with us, so we're trying to work it out with them as well. I would appreciate some feedback in the next couple of weeks, because we will be setting the date of the max levy hearing at our next meeting, because we're kind of coming down to a deadline. I believe, let me know if it's not true, I think our budget is where you want it to be, or the best it can be at this point.
Are we using any general reserves for this budget at all? General fund?
Yes, we are using 50,000 of the general fund reserves that we're not spending in parks this year.
On the budget,
It's already been budgeted, it was budgeted for this year,
okay?
so that will roll over to next year. If we budgeted it again, without pulling it out of reserves, virtually, the taxpayers will be double taxed on that money. So that's why we're pulling that out of reserves. 25,000 we're pulling out of reserves is hotel motel. And again, that's going towards that same, because the hotel motel, 50% of it has to be used on park and recreation, and library as well. It's actually just, other cultural, things that we have as part of our community. So we are, right now, if you look at our budget, it is 75,000 that we are pulling out of reserves. But again, it's money that was already budgeted, we're just not gonna ask for it again.
So it's a creative savings account. The
Yeah.
formality is because
We didn't
if
use
we
it this
don't
year.
put it into reserves this year, it won't carry over to next year and just basically goes
Right.
unspent. So it's just a way to carry the dollars that were already taxed this year
Yes,
over to use.
yes, absolutely.
So is this number you have in here, Dan, on the law enforcement, is that what you think the yearly dollar would be if we go 3%? Is that 4%? What is that figure you plugged in?
It was actually, I did that tonight again too.
First it was 4%,
3%,
dropped down
yeah.
to 3%.
It was actually came in at 3% increase from where we're at right now, 49,447, is actually $50,930.
And does that even pay for one officer of ours that we're paying here? And a car and everything else that goes with it. This is from a business standpoint, it's a lousy business deal. I'm not saying that.
I don't really want to discuss the Elk Run agreement, I would love to discuss that on the phone with you.
No, I'd
I
be
really
willing to
don't
meet
want-
with them, I'm not sure to rip them off. I mean, I
Okay.
know that you ain't gonna come in and say, well, we want a 5% increase, which it should be, but I know that it isn't there. In
No,
fact, I'd hate to be sitting in her position and increase something 100%.
well, and I know that I'll know more tomorrow too, because their council is gonna discuss it tonight. I had discussed with her today that we were looking at a 3-year agreement, 3% increase in the first year, 3% increase in the second year, and no increase in the third year. So I'll know more tomorrow, and yeah, I bet she'd be happy to meet with you.
Well, it was just me, I mean, you've got these two
Or-
others.
yeah.
It's,
Did you have something?
I did.
Okay.
So the thing about Elk Run, so we lose the 50,000. Nothing changes for our police department, but our taxpayers have to pay 50,000 more.
if we got a man up there, we could get rid of one man and one car.
You think so?
Yeah,
Oh
You think that's possible, Mike? I don't think so.
well then what are we doing up there?
8%, he's fitting it in.
It's like I made that reference before, you say a plus income. So I could sell stuff at a loss and say, well, we're getting the money in this plus income.
Okay,
You're doing
so
it at a loss.
let me ask you this.
Mayor, I thought we weren't gonna discuss this
If
anymore
we
tonight.
lose, if we lose Elk Run, then you're saying we need to get rid of the officer.
I didn't say we needed to, I said if you're that concerned over the budget, then, I'm not.
I just wanted to clarify that.
Do you have any other questions regarding the budget? Okay,
I have a question.
okay,
Should I restate my name and address?
That'd be fine.
Okay, Kelly Parker, Marion Avenue. We have a lot of expenses regarding Eagles Landing. I'm wondering, I know you said if we lose the contract for the police with Elk Run Heights, we're gonna raise to 8.3%. I'm hoping, I'm asking the council, when we're done building the infrastructure for Eagles Landing, can we look at lowering that a little bit? We're spending a lot on Eagles Landing. It's a big cost to the taxpayers. I know we want to build Evansdale and grow our tax base, but can we consider that?
That's actually not part of the general fund at all. That's part of capital projects, and that was money loaned for Eagles Landing development, and it has to be used on Eagles Landing development. But yes, when we're done completing that, you will not see expense at that point going further.
Thank you.
Mayor, I had just talked, and this was just for the benefit of the council members as we talked just before the meeting. One of the items that Chief Phillips had brought up was additional accounts or funds or a way to save or start planning for a capital expenditure like for the fire department. So again, just for my piece in, I talked with Chief Phillips as well. We will be needing a new ambulance here come, sooner than later. They're still in good conditions, but it's one of the whole, let's start kind of planning for the rainy day. I know that's not in this year, but I just wanted to bring it up that we have the discussion that that'll be something to look at for the future.
I think that's
Yeah,
the same way we done before on fire trucks and everything else.
Yep.
Plan for 'em.
Yeah, and that's just it. We haven't anything yet, and I did want to clarify because Chief Phillips asked me to look into it. We don't have anything yet, which the budget's pretty much done, but it is something in the near future that we'll have to start planning for. Yeah.
Well, I think once we get the park thing settled, that's been going on for 3 years of their improvements, I think this conversation on the police car could be a lot easier to achieve in budgeting, and along with what you're saying, both. So if we get through this budget year, I don't see a problem with what I brought up initially to you, Dan, on the cars, I don't see it.
I agree. Public discussion, none. Agenda items.
Laura Benson, Michigan Drive. The house next door to me at 1668 Michigan Drive is a disaster. I know I spoke with a couple of you guys about this. As I suspected, all of the pipes froze. That did happen, and that's because we don't have any oversight on our rental properties. Specifically, my main problem right now is the amount of sparrows. They're harboring in the defunct shed in the backyard over there. I've been asking for approximately 7 years for something to happen with that shed and for it to be torn down. My understanding is Mr. Wirtz gave a warning in October, and there has been no action since then. But I can tell you this, I have to use a leaf blower in my outdoor kitchen every time I go outside to tend on my chickens to get rid of all the sparrow dung. I've really had enough of this defunct building next door, and I would like for y'all to make a decision on whether or not we tear it down or take action on the property owner being Daniel Thorne, who owns several properties in our community. And we don't want to let him start bad habits and continue with them. So that's all. Thank you.
Dick Dewater, fourth ward.
Thank you.
So I got a question. Why would you both vote to be in the third ward?
Dick, I don't even want to talk about that at a meeting.
Really? You don't?
No. We didn't make a
The
decision.
fourth ward does not have a council person.
Right now, you still do.
Well,
Her.
but we don't have a council person that lives in the fourth ward. So how does this play out?
Well,
Why, I mean, I didn't.
It's not her fault.
Yeah, it's not my fault.
I'm not.
It's the
I'm
county,
just
the way they
asking,
done the ward
How
mapping.
did this play out?
We like the north elf.
They didn't have one before.
Okay, all right, so the zoning got changed and we're working through it.
Okay. So special election,
They both hold their positions until the next election, and
till
that's in twenty
next fall.
twenty-three.
That can't be.
2023, it is.
I called the Office of Elections in Buckeye County and it is as she said. She will represent Wood 4 until she's up for re-election. That's what Josh Rosen.
And then if she's up for re-election, she competes against Steve?
Mhm.
Okay.
We're working on those issues as we speak.
We can thank COVID for this.
Council, do you have anything that you'd like to share tonight?
I have one thing, Mayor. I'd like to have us continue, and I'm gonna come in and be more involved with that. This GPS thing that Chief Dean says it's a waste of money. I don't think it's a waste of money, and I think it's an accountability factor to look at what's going on. I'm for keeping that in place. I think it's a very good tool, the thing that you showed me. It gives us an insight as council when we come into what's going on, why we come up with some of these questions we came up with. So I am not for eliminating that going forward if that comes up. Next budget or something, isn't that due up next year?
We just paid it, it renews in September. So it will be a part of this budget. Anything else?
Yeah, I'd like to thank Deanne for working on the elk run situation. I think everybody wants to get into a little longer term. And it looks like she's passed that on, and hopefully we don't have to do this every year.
Well put.
I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll make that motion.
Thanks, guys.
Yep, thank you.